What is going on, everyone? Today is March 12th, 2024. You're tuned into the Invest in Hockey podcast. My name's Anthony Santini, and I'm joined here with,
Eric Wilson.
and today we are on the Zoom call talking hockey, looking at what the trade deadline looked like the past week and kind of recapping what happened and what's going to happen in the week to come. But obviously, I want to first and foremost start off with what an amazing Friday that was. And I know you had a little bit of a blockbuster announcement to kind of end our last podcast. So that was pretty interesting. But we'll get into detail with that. Let's kind of take a look at the trade deadline and what we thought about it. I know I was pretty active on Twitter. You were as well. And, it was definitely a lot better than last year. But maybe I found I was very interested. But a lot of people on Twitter were talking that they weren't as engaged. So a little bit interesting to me.
Yeah, I think the one thing I found interesting about what you mentioned is there always seems to be that bit of like disappointment from people online and people who maybe because of the breaking news that gets released early, whether that was the Jake Gensel deal kind of being released before the trade was announced, like things like that. I understand they can kind of cause disappointment, but when you compare this deadline to other deadlines, I don't see how you can be disappointed. I don't know what more you can expect when we kind of saw the trade board and we kind of saw some unexpected names being moved too. So we'll obviously get into that, but definitely great Friday for me just because I didn't have to go to school or go to work, so I was able to kind of spend some time on the couch actually watching the last few hours. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it was a chill day. I felt like the trade deadline started months ago though, because I mean Sean Monahan was moved, Chris Tannen was moved pretty early, and then obviously Wednesday, Thursday, Friday was just an absolute disaster with notifications and everything. But I mean, I'm gonna overall recap the trade deadline to say that it was a success. I mean, me as a viewer, I was definitely interested and engaged, no doubt. Like it felt like a lot of the teams that were in the playoffs, and that was the general consensus, where teams that are in the playoffs kind of beefed up than teams that were outside of the playoffs. And even more interestingly, the teams that are in a wild card spot didn't really make the moves that I thought they were going to make themselves better. I said that I would do a overall trade deadline grade, and what I was hoping for to predict was the Edmonton Oilers would have an F, and I believe it was it? Did I say Vegas would have an A plus?
I don't think
I'd
you
have to
said
go back.
Vegas, did you? No, no.
Oh, I said Vancouver. Vancouver was my pick. So Vancouver to go A plus, and then Edmonton to go F. And then after tossing out my grades, the team that I had at an A plus. So just to confirm, the only team at an A plus was the Vegas Golden Knights for me. And I know you want to counter that, and I'll let you get into that. But I'm gonna have Vegas as an A plus. They made the right moves leading up to the deadline and on deadline day. The teams that I'm gonna give a big fat F to were Detroit, New Jersey Devils, and the Ottawa Senators. So for me at least, those three teams just made the absolute atrocious moves. And honestly, lack thereof for some teams. Like we look at a team like the Islanders where they didn't even make a move. So it's tough to kind of judge a team like Ottawa, even that didn't make any moves, and give them an F. But how can you not when your team's looking like that? So that's where my grade comes from.
Yeah, I think I obviously want to counter your take just based on what I said in our trade deadline podcast. I think only thing I can think of on your end there before I get to my picks, but Ottawa moved Sanko, which I mean, like you kind of have to, and I think that's why you can't give them an F. I don't think it's fair to give them an F because they moved him, and you know for them to get anything out of Sanko is honestly like pretty solid, right? I believe they got a third and a fourth from Florida, right?
I think it was a second and a fourth. So my mistake for saying that Ottawa didn't make any moves, but I believe that was their only move. Maybe I was thinking of the Islanders that didn't make any moves
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah, no, that's no stress. I totally agree. When you don't make moves, it's like either you're an F or you don't rank them at all. You can't really say a team did well if they didn't make any
Yeah.
moves. But yeah, decent takes by you there. For me, my F was Pittsburgh in the trade deadline podcast, and I'll stick to that just to say that if you're gonna move a guy like Gensel, you should have moved some other key pieces too to just at least get a better pick and not just be on that fringe playoff spot. Like I know they're not gonna make the playoffs at this time, but like why didn't you move Riley Smith and get some value? Why didn't you move? I don't know if you wanted to move Raquel, but like it's just an interesting situation. It was almost like they were set up to get the F. Like you know,
It makes a lot of sense for me to give them the F, and I definitely agree with you because first off, having Jake Gensel in the trade talks, when you're a team that this summer was looking to win a Stanley Cup, I mean, we talked about it. Like, that's just almost disgraceful to have, everyone bought in. You have Malkin, Crosby, Letang, and then now Carlson coming
Yeah.
in, and they're ready to go try and win a cup. And then at the trade deadline, you're moving a key piece like Jake Gensel. That was definitely interesting. And then to not even get, I mean, I don't know what you thought about the trade for Gensel, but I don't really think that the Penguins got enough value back to even, you know, quantify moving Gensel. Like maybe they could have held on to him for a little bit, see what they could shop him for in the summer. But good on Carolina to definitely make some moves. And for a team that notoriously doesn't rent a lot of players, that you could tell that they want it this year and they're all in.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, just to kind of build on the Carolina point, they were my A plus pick, and I believe they did have an A plus deadline just because they did grab Gensel, and I didn't really know that before they grabbed him and Kuznetsov, who I think's a very underrated ad. Like he looked so happy in those videos in Carolina, and I'm happy he's at the NHL level where he belongs. Like we know what he's capable of. There's so many guys in a similar stage to Kuznetsov where we've seen these guys have 80 plus points, whether that's a guy like Johnny Gaudreau, Jonathan Huberdeau, and sure you have down years, but like you still know what they're capable of, and you got to respect that, right?
Oh, no doubt. And like we talked about last pod, where sometimes it's not even the biggest player, the player that's top three on the TSN trade bait that can change a season when it comes playoff time. But when we were talking about a player like Arturi Lehkonen, like could Kuznetsov that finds, a really good role on that second, third line for Carolina, could he be the reason why Carolina is able to make it to a Stanley Cup and hopefully win it? I don't know. But to look at the trade deadline from an overall perspective, I'd say it was an absolute success, and I'm sure you agree with that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It was a success, and it obviously brings us one step closer to the Stanley Cup, where I know my pick's clear now. I didn't give you a chance to kind of give yours at least to the viewers and make it clear before we do a post on our social media. So why don't you go ahead with
Yeah,
that?
yeah, so definitely coming out this week, and I'll be able to make a little graphic with our picks to see. I know I want to let you touch on why you picked Carolina because we didn't get to talk about it too much at the end of the pod, and then maybe I could go into a little bit of what I was thinking with my pick. But I mean, there it is. You were correct 2 years in a row. You correctly picked Vegas, and I believe Colorado the year before that. So
Mhm.
I'd say that your pick is a little bit heavier in my pockets when I look at maybe tossing some bets or even maybe having it, you know, in the back of my mind for maybe Carolina is a legitimate contender. So I'll let you go into detail with why you picked Carolina, but obviously I want to let the viewers know that you have been correct 2 years in a row. So
Appreciate that. Appreciate that. It's good to have the receipts, and I'm glad you remember those because not a lot of people do, I guess, just because you got all your buddies say a pick, and then all the playoff action happens. But a big rationale for my pick that I never really even talked about is like you look at a core one season and you look at that core 5 years later. If that core is no longer there, like but the coach is, I think like that's where a big issue can be. And for Carolina, the core is still there and the coach is still there. And Rod Brendamore, who I think he's an amazing coach. It started when he was going through that adversity with the team. They'd lose to the Bruins. I think they got swept by the Bruins 4-0, call it six
that
years
was
ago. And
two years ago, I think. Or no, didn't they? Or they beat the Bruins, I guess, two
yeah, they
years
beat
ago,
the
right?
Bruins. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so it all started like call it 6 years ago. They got swept by the Bruins, had a couple tough outs there, but since then that core's stayed there. Like Kochekov's been there for 5 years, even though he hasn't been playing every year. Teravainen and Aho, everyone's been there for years except Burns, who's in his second year with them, and it's just a true like group that's deep, and I think a really good hockey team. And I just, again, their weakness might show in that, but with Freddie healthy, I think you could actually consider a possible tandem for the playoffs that looks similar to almost the Leafs tandem right now in terms of how good their goalies are.
I mean, no doubt when you look at their team, all in all, having Kotkaniemi and even flexing Jordan Stahl with that third, fourth center on
Mhm.
that team, I mean, how can you go wrong? Obviously, a couple of years ago, people were chirping Kotka for how poor his play
Yeah.
was, but this season he's been great. And even when you look at their defense, like Brett Burns, Jacob Slavin, and then to have Frederick Anderson step back into the pipes. I mean, he looked great last game. I picked up in fantasy, and I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
hopefully having him in the playoffs for me. But I don't want to agree with you to say I think Carolina's gonna, win the cup. Obviously, it's a little bit more fun to have my own pick, but I wanted to make sure that I made this pick before the trade deadline. So I was pleasantly surprised to say that, I was happy with the moves my team makes, but the team that I'm gonna pick to win the Stanley Cup is gonna be the Colorado Avalanche. So looking back at what they were able to provide 2 years ago when they won that cup, like you talked about with your core and obviously what they're able to bring to the table, I just think that Colorado is still just as dominant. And when you look at Nathan McKinnon, he wants it this year, and the stats are proving it, the team's proving it, and they're making the moves to go all in. Although we looked at that trade, obviously Bowen Byram for Casey Middlestat, at a first glance, even me personally, an individual that loves Bowen Byram, like he's a great hockey player, you have to almost make those tough trades to fill out roles on your team, and adding Casey Middlestat adds that role to the Colorado Avalanche. So for me, my Stanley Cup winner this year is going to be the Colorado Avalanche.
There you go. There you have it. So it's pretty sick because technically my pick and your pick could meet in the final. So that's probably the coolest thing about our picks is we're not going to have like a first round clash or anything or a second round clash. Hopefully we can watch some nice matchups. Let's call it even Toronto Boston where neither of our picks are involved and we can just kind of sit back and relax, right?
Yeah, to get like a funny story, actually, I don't even know if I ever told you this story, but when we were younger, my dad actually made me and my brother pick two teams at the start of the season, um, to put money on in Vegas when he was visiting there. So he put, I think it was like $100 on the Bruins, and then my brother put $100 on the Canucks. So those are his picks, and he was able, when he went to Vegas, he went and he picked those. And obviously, like we know, Vancouver went to the Stanley Cup Finals, and unfortunately for those fans, lost to, and my brother lost to the Boston Bruins. But fortunately for me, we were able to turn it into like a little family trip to go cash out that ticket. So that was awesome. But like you said, hopefully two teams meeting in the finals. You can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, yeah. And just to kind of recap that with the goalie talk, I think people are so critical of goalies, but at the end of the day, when you look at Stanley Cup picks from all these teams, whether you have guys from TSN, guys from Sportsnet making their picks, a lot of these teams don't have elite goaltenders. And whether you want to say Gorgiev's elite or he's not, or you want to say that, um, a team like the Canes has elite goaltending, these goalies can let in more than 3 goals and still win the game, right? And we see that all the time. So I think that like the question of whether the playoffs are going to be high scoring is a topic for even another day. But so much to say about the goalies, and I just wanted to end off with that at least before our next conversation.
Oh, 100%. I just think that there's a lot of teams that are so deep this season, and a player that is going to miss out on playing on a deep team where I think he just kind of, although he's been exciting, he's almost found himself in a roster spot that, do we almost want to call it that he doesn't deserve it? I mean, he has made a massive splash in the past 2 weeks, but Matt Rempe has officially been suspended for 4 games from the NHL after his elbow in last night's game versus, was it Carolina, I believe, or New
Um,
Jersey?
New
I
Jersey,
think it
yes,
was New Jersey. So he elbowed. I don't remember the player's name. Was it
Siegenthaler, eh?
Siegenthaler, I believe, or wasn't it McDermott? Or no, McDermott wanted to fight him. That's why I was getting mixed up. But I mean, for Rempe to kind of miss 4 games now, could the Rangers find themselves in a spot where they go on a 4 game heater, win 4 straight? He comes back and they say, you know what? It's time for the playoffs. We don't need these distractions anymore. You've been great, but it's time for you to drop back to the AHL. So, what do you think about the suspension at a glance, and kind of what Rempe is going to look like in the lineup when he does come back?
Yeah, you because you mentioned that, you almost stole my thought where I said, what if like he doesn't play for the rest of the regular season slash playoffs because of what happened? Like it almost is like, is this suspension good for not only league safety but for the Rangers? Maybe this changes things, but I guess to say my opinion on the suspension is like I was expecting 5+ games for Rempe, and I mean I know 4 is not too different, but player safety made it clear what was wrong with the hit and or sorry with the elbow you call it, but I think for the Rangers you just got to move past it and throw back guys in the lineup who you believe in, right?
Yeah, when it comes to the playoffs, no matter who the player is, no matter what their name is, you need to put in your best possible positions. And whoever can fill that lineup to your best ability, you have to go with that. So I'm going to see what Matt Rempe has to offer when he comes back. But you've seen so many rookies talk about You don't want to miss out, or even veterans, you don't want to miss out on an opportunity to play a game if you're sick, if you're injured, because look, look at Dallas, a player like Logan Stankoven, a player like Wyatt Johnson, like these young guys could step into a lineup. Even Maverick Bork, who could find himself in a spot, step into a lineup, score a goal, score two, have a goal and two apples, I think Stankoven had. And then, a player like Jamie Ben's looking and they're like, I could really lose my spot on a team. Obviously, it'd be tough for a player of his caliber to lose a spot, but when you're a fourth liner, you just need to show the coach that you're able to provide as much as you possibly can. And how can you resist having a goal scoring fourth liner? So we'll see what Rempe looks like when he comes out of this suspension, but obviously a little bit disappointing from a fan's point of view.
Yeah, it honestly, I feel like there hasn't actually been that many suspensions, but then when you see that, it reminds you of all the other hits by veterans and guys who are out of the league now. One being Matt Cook. I don't want to compare like Rempe to any other goon slash big hitters, but we obviously know once you start to develop the reputation that a lot of players do, your time in the league kind of slowly gets to an end once you've been maybe passed around to a few teams, right?
Oh, definitely. And it could easily make it more challenging for a player too. Like just imagine, remember we were watching that game against the Leafs Saturday night? It was almost like he was obligated to fight Ryan Reeves. Like he had absolutely no choice. But I don't want
Yeah.
to stay on the topic too long. Obviously, it's been a great story so far. Let's see where it takes us. I want to kind of shift gears into the PWHL, and I know we don't do enough segments about them, but the past couple weeks, the PWHL and myself just looking at what they're able to provide for that league, I mean, I've just been in awe in what they've provided for hockey. And I mean, girls for hockey, even looking at men's hockey, the opportunity to change the game in so many different ways. So I wanted to talk about, let me just grab this sheet here. I want to make sure I get this right. So, three different opportunities in the PWHL that they offer in game and also within the draft that I think could be implemented into the NHL. So, I kind of want to get your opinion on that. And I want to
Mm.
hear you go in depth to see maybe the pros and cons of what that could provide.
Yeah, this will be really fresh for me, so I'm excited. I let you kind of choose these topics, but again, I'm going to be totally unbiased, just not unbiased, but totally free of thought, which I'm happy about. So yeah.
Perfect. So, as we all know, PWHL is a six-team league. Four teams make the playoffs. And within the draft, we know that in the NHL, there's always been an issue of, our teams tanking. We look at Chicago, we look at San Jose, and even to look at like our fantasy league, we look at teams that might be tanking right now. So it's kind of a laughable matter. But it seems like the PWHL has been able to figure out a way where tanking is almost impossible. So I don't know if you've heard how it works, but like I said, six teams, four make the playoffs. So
Okay.
the Chicago Blackhawks were just officially eliminated from playoff contention. In the PWHL, once you are officially eliminated from playoff contention, with every win, you accumulate points. Okay, so once you're
Hmm.
eliminated from the playoffs, you slowly accumulate points. This point system, I believe, is like, I think it's like, and it's points towards the first overall draft pick. So there's only two teams going against each other. If you win a game, I believe it's 2 points. If you lose an OT, I think it's 1 point. Pretty standard. And this kind of allows teams to still make sure that players are playing, games are still good, if you want to say. You're able to fill the seats in the arena and kind of give teams an opportunity to still go out there and say, you know what? We want the first overall pick. Let's go win games, not let's show up and lose and it's a terrible mood. So if you're the NHL, how do you look at this and say, could this be a good idea to implement in the game? So for example, I just want to make sure you totally understand Chicago officially eliminated from playoff contention. And ever
Yeah.
since they will slowly start racking up points. And the more they win, the closer they will get to the first overall pick.
Yeah, okay, that totally makes sense. I think the fact that like it'll be between two PWHL teams is pretty awesome, and I can totally see how, you know, everyone plays everyone obviously, and that's maybe where the difference is between the PWHL and NHL is where you play against your conference slash division a lot more than maybe those teams that are further away. And I think that if I look at the Chicago Blackhawks, like they're easily, like no question, a bottom three team. Um, even if you don't look at the standings, like on paper, right? And so for them to be eliminated first, that would clearly give them the advantage to gain more points or opportunity to gain more points. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but I like the idea of totally going into any game and wanting to win, whether it's game 67 or 82. I assume they probably have like 18 games left, but for some reason, I used to think that teams got eliminated earlier than they do now, and maybe that just means the Chicago Blackhawks have gathered a couple points up here and there. But I can see how it would be effective in the NHL one day, but I think I'd want to see it be be in the PWHL for maybe 2 3 years, just because I know like things happen, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's always room for error, and definitely with something like this, there is risk to allowing bad teams to maybe on the opposite of what we've been accustomed to, where bad teams win and that actually works out better for them. So it's a little bit funky, but just imagine a game where San Jose and Chicago, game 82, they're scheduled and they're
Yeah,
tied up, and it's like the Macklin Celebrini game. Whoever wins gets Macklin Celebrini. So, I mean, for fans, and even imagine him watching the game, that would be
yeah.
absolutely nuts. So that's something that I want to, if you'd never heard of it, I heard about it and I was like, wow, this is a great idea. And I think could definitely be a great addition to the NHL. So another rule that we could quickly fly by is called the
Yeah.
jailbreak, or what has been termed the jailbreak rule in the PWHL. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but if a team is
No.
on the penalty kill and they score a shorthanded goal, that goal will actually free their player from the penalty box. So what do you think about that? Because obviously that can entail teams being a little bit more offensively aggressive. And even we saw the Leafs do it at the beginning of the season, having the power kill, tossing Matthews and Marner out there. So what do you think about that?
That I think that would change the game in a pretty sick way where you'd see a lot more skill guys and guys who can score goals on the PK. Now, of course, there's going to be people who say like, that's risky to allow guys to penalty kill who are only there to play offense, but there's some sort of reward that like anyone can feel in hockey when you score a shorthanded goal and then you go back to the bench and like your teammates are excited for you. Your coaches are excited. You scored a shorty, but then you still have to kill off
Yeah.
that other 45 seconds. And that's maybe the only part that like I would miss as a fan is like the job's not finished, right?
Yeah, like Kobe said, job's not finished. But I just think like you should be rewarded, right? Like 5-on-4 and you score a shorthanded goal with playing against the team's top players where they have an advantage. I mean, something like that, you should definitely be rewarded your player out of the box. So to look at that and kind of say, you know what, this could fit in the NHL was exactly why I want to do this segment and talk about it. But
Mm-hmm.
let's move on to the next one. So, like we said, with the playoffs, there is 6 teams in the PWHL. 4 of them make the playoffs, and the very first team that comes in first place, technically winning, if you want to call it the President's Trophy in the NHL, is actually able, interesting enough, to pick who they want to play in the playoffs. So, to kind of make it work for you to think how it would work in the NHL, what would it look like if division winners were able to pick who they played within their conference, obviously, in the playoffs? What do you think about that?
You know what? I think it'd be cool to have that implemented in the NHL one day and almost reminisce that 1v8 style slash, you know, top team versus weakest team in the conference. But of course, everyone wants that like bit of thrill or excitement around like who the team is going to pick to play, right? And that's where I think it almost would frustrate teams if like if you went in as the number one team, like and you had to pick who you wanted to play, like what if you just I don't know how to explain it, but what if you
I
just
mean, it's
said
just, yeah, go on, finish your sentence.
pick for me, like I don't want to choose, and I guess that's where
Yeah.
they would say like that's when it would automatically be the worst team in the conference, eh? But what if you wanted to play that the team in your division that you've played more
Hey,
times, right?
exactly, right? And that's where it brings up such an opportunity for teams like in first place. Like, imagine, I mean, look at I want to get, I'll let you know 2 things I'm thinking right now. First of all, imagine a team picks maybe the best team in the conference, and they're like, you know what, let's wipe these guys. Let's get them out of the way, and then let's lollygag to the Stanley Cup Finals. Obviously, still a tough way to get to the finals, but it just brings up such an opportunity to change the game. The second thing I want to say was imagine the receipts, like right up there that the team's able to think of, where if the Bruins last year were to go ahead and pick Florida, and then Florida's like, you know what, we're keeping receipts on this. And then they're like, let's go. Our backs aren't even against the wall. They picked us. They think we're the worst opportunity, or they think that we're the worst team coming into the playoffs in the conference. Let's just go out there, have fun, work hard. And that's kind of what an
Yeah.
opportunity like this brings for the NHL. So definitely a lot of if we want to call it like ways to make Gary Bettman think come the summer. But I
Yeah.
mean the PWHL definitely showing right out of the gates that they're a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, it's trial and error, in my opinion, where again, like these ideas all sound great. I'd love to just see them kind of flow into the PWHL, and then that way we can watch some pretty sick playoffs there for the PWHL as well.
Yeah, and then pretty much to wrap up before we end this podcast with a little bit of exciting news. There's not a lot of information just yet for us to speculate on, but there may be a 33rd team coming into the NHL. It looked today that I believe it was Kansas or was it Utah? I believe Utah or Atlanta passed a bill to build an arena. So if you're Gary Bettman right now, what do you think a 33rd team offers for the NHL? Even though, we look at Vegas and we look at Seattle who came into the league and I mean, to look at Vegas, like they've just taken the league right by the horns and they've just ran with it the past couple of years.
Yeah, I think if you're Gary Bettman, like you almost have to address the concerns that are surrounding the league right now. And although there might not be a lot, there's a lot of talk, like underground talk about like the Coyotes playing at Mullet Arena. That's just one example, but there's a lot of talk about these teams that are haven't made the playoffs in a long time and are you know completely in a bit of a nutshell where they're not going to be good soon. And in terms of fans and ticket sales, like obviously it's a business, right? And I think that while there'd be excitement about adding a 33rd team, I don't think that Gary Bettman like needs it to happen in the next 5 years. I think maybe 5 plus years, yeah, but I think there's bigger things to address in these next couple of years.
Definitely a lot of things to address. And even though it's worked out with Vegas and Seattle obviously beating Colorado last year, I just don't know how many times it could work. Like if it comes to a point where there's almost 40 teams in the NHL, what could that look like? What could it look like for the CBA? Like obviously players don't want to go in every 4 years with the nerves to say, you know what, am I going to be in an expansion draft? So obviously a lot for Gary to think of, but without further ado, I think that's going to conclude our episode. I don't know if you had a final thought to kind of bring in.
Yeah, I did. I had to say this last thing because I mentioned goalies probably 10 minutes ago on the pod, but a huge thing is that there has been a shortage of goalies in not just the NHL, but in professional hockey. And I think that when you add another team, that means you're adding, call it 5 goalies in their system. And to be real, scoring's up in the NHL. It's obviously it's going like this right in the last 10 years, and I think that it's something to consider because nothing beats a hockey game where you got two good goalies, two good teams, and it's called a 3-1 or 3-2 game. Just wanted to mention that before, but go ahead and wrap up for our viewers.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it would be exciting, and definitely with more teams comes more opportunity for players, teams, management, associates, fans, everything. So, me personally, growing the game is obviously in the best interest of everyone. But let's conclude this podcast, and obviously a great one at that. I'm looking forward to doing another interview part two with Nicholas Sema of the OHL. So we're gonna chat with him tomorrow, see what he's up to, and then hopefully look forward to talk to everyone next week about what has happened in the past week of NHL hockey.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that, and definitely some big content coming out. We'll have a lot of time tomorrow in our
Yeah,
studio session there. So looking forward to it. Thanks, Sense.
sweet. Cheers.
Cheers.